Julian Hart wasn't the kind of man you'd find in a diner after midnight. But tonight the CEO who could buy silence with a signature was chasing quiet that couldn't be bought. The coffee was burnt, the lights hummed, and the waitress who refilled his cup didn't look twice, until she did. Her gaze froze on the papers in his hand, on a name looped in careful ink. "That's my dad's signature," she said. In that instant, Julian's world, built on contracts, numbers, and control, cracked open to reveal a story he was never meant to find. Julian Hart didn't do late dinners in places with laminated menus and coffee that tasted like someone boiled a memory. He did reservations booked 3 weeks in advance, private dining rooms with a view of the skyline, crystal that caught the light like a net. But tonight had been a day of long edges and dull blades, an acquisition he didn't trust, a boardroom full of eyes that watched him for cracks. And he had taken a turn off the main avenue and walked 2 blocks into a pocket of the city where he wouldn't be recognized. It was a neighborhood holdout, a strip of stubborn storefronts wedged between luxury towers, like a book someone forgot to remove before remodeling the shelf. The bell over the door chattered when he stepped inside. A dozen tables, a long counter, a chalkboard with a crooked list of specials: pot roast, chicken pot pie, lemon meringue. The place was called Jules's, which made him smirk for half a second until he realized the name wasn't a wink at him, but at a woman in a Polaroid on the wall, dark braids, bright grin, her arm around a blonde cook with a cleft chin. The air smelled like onions softened in butter. The heat wrapped around him and lowered his blood pressure a notch. He sat in a corner booth that had seen more years than the tower he'd left, and took off his coat. The waitress glided toward him with a practiced efficiency that translated comfortably as kindness. She was in her early 20s, he guessed, black hair twisted into a messy bun, a small notepad tucked into the pocket of her black apron. Her eyes were the color of very dark honey, warm and steady. "Late night?" she asked, not interested in the answer so much as in giving him the space to offer one. "Something like that," he said. His voice always sounded calmer than he felt. It was useful in rooms with glass walls and long tables. It was less useful now, when he wanted to take a breath and not think about how the board had pushed him into a deal with an aeroline energy that was both good for the market and wrong in his gut. Aeroline had something he wanted badly, a battery technology they claimed would reduce grid waste by 30% without rare earths. The signature on the assignment documents was a neat series of letters that had looked like nothing to him until it didn't. "Coffee?" the waitress said. "Please." "Food." "I'll try the pot roast." He watched one corner of her mouth tuck up, as if this were the answer she'd expected. He pulled his phone out, thumbed through the 52 unopened emails he wasn't going to answer tonight, and then slid the phone face down and reached for the leather folio in his coat. He didn't know why he'd brought it. He normally didn't carry sensitive documents anywhere but the office or his home safe. Maybe he'd wanted to look at the papers without his legal team murmuring in his ear, without the hum of compliance in the background. He wanted to see with his own eyes what he had just signed to set in motion. He took out the top page. The light whisper of thick paper sliding over the next. Patent assignment. He knew the term by heart. He also knew that when things went wrong, the wrongness was almost always in a footnote or a date. He flicked his eyes down the page and ran a finger under a clause. Everything was in order. He flipped to the second page. Initials there. Third page. And then the fourth. The original claim chart, with the inventor attribution, a signature in careful cursive, M.J. Morales. He took a sip of water. The glass tapped the table when he set it down. "You need a minute with the menu?" the waitress said, reappearing with coffee so hot the steam lifted in a rope. "I'm good," he said. "Pot roast. Coming right up." She turned to go, and her eyes landed on the folio, on the corner of the page he had folded back, on the signature looped like a ribbon at the bottom right. She didn't stare. She didn't do anything for a heartbeat. Then she breathed in through her nose, the kind of breath you take when your body recognizes something before your brain knows why. "Sir?" she said softly. He looked up. "Yes?" Her hand hovered near the paper, but she didn't touch it. "That's my dad's signature." He blinked. His heartbeat stuttered, as if a door had just opened where there shouldn't be a door. The glass of water slid in his fingers and slipped. It hit the tabletop, tipped, and then shattered on the floor. The sharp sound cracked the quiet in the room. Heads turned. Anyone who hadn't noticed the suit in the corner now noticed the glass at his feet. A busboy hustled over with a towel. Julian felt the odd, weightless sensation that meant the story he thought he was in had just revealed a different third act. "I'm sorry," he said automatically, reaching into the folio with steady fingers that felt like someone else's, and flipping the paper closed so fast it could have been a trick. "I'm sorry." He'd been called unflappable in profiles written by people who had never watched him in a real storm. But it took more than a market swing to make him drop a glass. It took a quiet voice saying a sentence that burned a hole through several layers of his day. "Let me get this," the busboy said. He crouched, gathered the crystalline mess, made the floor the way it had been 10 seconds ago. The waitress didn't move. "What did you say?" Julian asked, because the script called for repetition when the lines didn't parse the first time. She glanced at the rest of the dining room and then back at him. She looked careful, like someone who knew how to contain an emotion so it didn't ignite too big a feeling in the wrong place. "The signature on your paper," she said low. "That's my dad's, Marco J. Morales." His mouth went dry. He tried to imagine the number of ways this could be true and came up with 3. 2 of them made his stomach drop. The third was that this was a coincidence with a common name and similar handwriting, and he had spent enough time in high-stake negotiations to know that coincidences were lazy scapegoats. "What's your name?" he asked, more gently than a CEO would ask a stranger on a late shift. She hesitated. "Lena." "Lena, would you—" He heard himself and corrected, "Do you have a second to talk? Not here, in the back. Or I can wait until your break. I don't want to—" He stopped. The Julian Hart in magazines knew how to finish sentences. The one with water on his shoes decided not to pretend. She studied him in the way people do when they decide if you are a problem, or a solution, or a storm. "My manager will have a heart attack if I go in the back with a customer," she said. There was a wryness in her tone that saved them both from formality. "But I have a 10-minute break in 6 minutes. Will you be here?" "I'll be here." He slid his card out and pushed it across the table. It was the simple white one he used when he wanted to mean something and not advertise it. No job title, just a name, a number, an email. "I'm Julian." She read the card. If she recognized the name, she didn't show it. "Okay, Julian?" He watched her walk away, watched the way she kept her balance between the kitchen and the tables, watched how many small calculations it took to carry 4 plates and 3 conversations without dropping any of them. He sat with the folio closed, the signature sealed away for 6 minutes that felt like a long fall. When she came back, she set a mug of coffee in front of him and one in front of the empty seat across. She sat. She was still a waitress, even on her break. She tucked her braid tighter, adjusted the hem of her apron so it wouldn't drag on the floor. "Talk," she said. "Is your father—" he began carefully. "Marco J. Morales, the engineer?" Something flickered in her eyes. "He was an engineer," she said. "Before." "Before what?" "Before the thing that took everything." The line sounded rehearsed, which meant it had been said enough times to wear a groove in the mouth. Before a company signed him into a corner and said he could keep his ethics or his career, but not both. We moved. He stopped talking about work. He started fixing other people's cars for cash and calling it freedom. Julian's chest tightened. He opened the folio and turned it so she could see the lower right corner of the page. He didn't show her the heading, the company names, any of the clauses. He only revealed the looped script, steady and precise. The M that looked like a mountain, the J that curved under like a hook, the last name written in a hand that trusted itself. Lena's jaw trembled. Her thumb hovered over the paper for long enough to be counted, and then she pulled her hand back, like she'd almost touched a hot pan. "How did you get that?" she asked. "We're acquiring a company that claims a technology," he said. "This is an original attribution from 10 years ago." He held her gaze. There was no point in softening anything now. "Tell me about your father." She searched his face for hooks and hazards. "He used to talk about batteries," she said eventually, wary but unable to hold it back. "Not the kind you put in toys, the kind the world would use if the world wanted to do better. He had a name for it, something like—" "Yarrow," Julian said, because he had read 70 pages of engineering notes this afternoon, and the word had lodged between his teeth. "That," Lena said. "He would write on napkins at lunch. My mom would get mad about the ink. He'd say ideas were messy. He had a notebook, brown with a red ribbon. He kept it in a safe my uncle made. He said it was his spine." "Where is he now?" "Gone," she said, and the syllable collapsed without drama. "He left 2 years ago. Said he couldn't breathe in the city anymore. He sends me postcards from places with windmills. I keep them under my bed like I'm 12. "Do you have anything?" Julian said, the questions assembling like a blueprint, with his signature on it, anything dated. She hesitated. "I have letters," she said, "old ones, and one of his notebooks. He left it for me. Said if anyone ever tried to put his name on something without his permission, to use this. I figured that was paranoia, or pride. Now—" She looked down at the corner of the page again. "I want to help," Julian said. He expected the line to sound like a line. It didn't. Not charity, not the kind that feels like a favor and disappears when the press does. "If that signature is what I think it is, your father was erased from something with money attached to it, and more importantly, with credit attached to it. If it's true, I can fix some of it." She laughed once, the sound a scraped metal, kind of hopeful. "What would fixing look like?" she asked. "Will you post an apology on your company website? Send a fruit basket?" "Lawyers," Julian said. "Good ones, investigators. A pressure campaign that rearranges the stakes so people who prefer shadows have to work in a room with lights. We'll need to verify the documents you have. We'll need to find your dad." "Who are you?" Lena asked, not unkindly. He considered telling her a clean version. He opted for a useful one. "The person who can get in a room with the people who signed your father into a corner," he said. "And the person who has enough to lose that it means something when I tell them they can't keep doing business like they own the sun." She studied him. "If this goes wrong," she said, "I'll lose my job. I might lose the little bit of solid ground I have left. My landlord is already mad about last month's rent. I'm not a chess piece. I'm a person." "I know," he said, "and I won't move you without asking. If you let me, I'll build the kind of board where you get to play." She stared at him another long second. Then she nodded, quick and small, like she was accepting something heavier than she could carry yet. "My break is over," she said, "and my manager is watching us, like he's going to turn into a bat if I don't stand up. I get off at midnight. If you're serious, be here with a car. I'll bring the notebook." "I'll be here." He was. At 12:01, when she slid through the scratched door in a denim jacket and a backpack that had seen better weeks, he was standing by a sedan without a driver. He opened the back door, let her see the empty seat, the absence of anyone in a suite other than him. "Where to?" he asked. "My place," she said, as if saying it to herself to check if the risk was worth it. He drove. He didn't turn on the radio. The city slid by in layered sheets of light and shadow, a map folded in a way that showed only certain parts of itself. She lived in a building where the paint peeled in strips and the elevators took long naps. Her apartment was neat, the kind of neat you keep because things feel safer when they're in order. A kettle whistled as if it had been trained by someone who believed hot water fixed most human problems. She went into her bedroom and came back with a shoebox wrapped in a piece of a grocery bag and tied with red twine. She set it on the table and untied the knot. Inside was a notebook, brown leather worn to dark at the corners, a ribbon that had once been red and was now memory of red. He reached out and didn't touch it. She put her thumb on the first page and slid it open. The inside cover held a name, an address, a signature. He had already seen that signature today. His throat tightened, not with emotion exactly, but with recognition of a thing that had survived. She flipped. The pages were dense with writing, diagrams, the verbose joy of a mind that believed it could solve something that mattered. Dates. He scanned timelines and found entries that predated Aeroline's earliest filings by 18 months. "I'll get this scanned," he said. "Meanwhile, you keep it. If anyone comes looking for it, call me and leave the building by the back stairs and go to the cafe on 45th where the ceiling fans don't work. Sit at the table by the ficus. I'll find you there." "You're used to giving instructions that sound like spy movies," she said. "I'm used to people who lie," he said simply, "and I've learned they have routines." He made 3 calls on the street, his voice low and precise. One to Priya Desai, his general counsel, who had known him since the years when he wore suits that didn't fit because he couldn't afford ones that did. One to Michael Cade, a private investigator who had quit a corporate security firm after they asked him to do something that felt like breaking a promise. And one to his head of communications, who didn't pick up at this hour, but would call back when she saw his name. By morning, he had a team in motion and a meeting on his calendar with his board chair, Evelyn Lang, who had eyes like frost and a mind like a scalpel. By noon, he had a file the size of a small country on Aeroline's co-founders and the people who had circled them like birds over fresh bread. The name that emerged from the mess was one that made him pinch the bridge of his nose until a headache receded. Colin Garrick, his own CFO who had cozied up to Aeroline during a strategic partnership exploration and steered the diligence documents with a little too much care. He took the file to Priya and laid it on her desk. "Tell me what I'm not allowed to say," he said. He hated that he had to ask. He was used to deciding what needed to be said and paying the costs later. But this required precision. Priya flipped through, her long braids sliding over her shoulder. She said nothing for 10 minutes and then said, "We can open inventorship correction proceedings. If the dates in that notebook hold, we can make a case. We'll need corroboration, emails, witnesses. We'll need to anticipate Aeroline's smear campaign." A man like Morales who left quietly and stayed quiet becomes easy to paint as a disgruntled ghost. He left to protect his family, Julian said. He stayed quiet because he thought the cost of speaking would be their roof. "So we tell that story before they twist it," Priya said, "and we find him." They did. Michael Cade called at 6:23 that evening from a wind farm town in the middle of a flat map. "He goes by Mark Morrell," he said. "He's been checked in at a motel longer than anyone should live in a motel. He works nights cleaning classrooms at a community college and days fixing old men's trucks. He eats at a diner with a mural of a wheat field because the coffee's cheap if you bring your own clean mug." "Is he safe?" "For now," Michael said. "He keeps his head down. The only reason anyone remembers him is because he leaves too much tip." "Tell him his daughter is asking," Julian said, "and tell him it's time to sign his name where it belongs." Michael's pause meant he'd heard something he didn't expect to hear from a man like Julian Hart. "You got it," he said, "but if he says no—" "Then we convince him this isn't about pride," Julian said. "It's about records. Records tell other men what they can get away with." The board meeting was exactly as hostile and performative as he had predicted. Evelyn Lang listened to his summary with a face that belonged in oil paint. "Are you telling us," she said, "that Aeroline's crown jewel is built on a stolen crown, and that you want to take their crown and hand it to a waitress in a diner because her father wrote some interesting notes?" "She's not a prop," Julian said evenly. "She's a person with standing, and her father is the inventor whose work your jewel is cut from. If we don't act, and someone acts before us, we lose the deal. We lose the future revenue, and we lose the thin coil of integrity that's held this company's center in place. I won't sign an acquisition we can't defend, and I won't get caught lying about a name that belongs on a patent." Colin Garrick leaned back, his smile a controlled flicker. "Perhaps you should leave the law to your counsel, Julian," he said. "We have assurances. Aeroline did diligence. The inventor was compensated. Priya slid a copy of the notebook into the center of the table, like a card in a game that had been stacked. Was he, she asked, or was he threatened into silence with a document that wouldn't survive sunlight? Did you know, Colin, that the notary on the assignment you waved around was disbarred last year for fudging mortgage closings? Or did you miss that because you were busy on the golf course? Colin said nothing. His right hand made a brief, restless movement on the leather of his armrest, the only tell he ever offered. Julian looked at the faces around the table. He had raised money from some of these people when the company was new, and he was ugly with optimism. He had seen them cry when they sold their first division, and the market cheered. He had thought for years that this room was the place where he belonged. Now it felt like a place he might be visiting for the last time. "I'm prepared," he said, "to recommend we pause the acquisition. I'm prepared to sign off on full compensation for Mr. Morales and a reattribution of inventorship. I'm prepared to take the hit publicly. If you think this is weakness, vote me out. If you think this is strength, back me." Evelyn's eyes cooled another degree. "You would put your position on the line for a man you have never met?" "I would put it on the line," he said, "for the thing that got me here, the right to say no to something that is profitable and wrong. It wasn't a clean vote. It never is. But the board smelled PR smoke and understood that if they didn't move toward the fire with extinguishers, someone would show up with cameras. They backed him, reluctantly. It was the kind of reluctant that turned friends into liabilities in 6 months. But he'd take it. He drove to the diner with the shoebox scans in a secure drive and found Lena wiping down table 6 with the short, efficient strokes. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I'm always hungry," she said. "I run food up and down this strip for 8 hours, and then I go home and eat toast." "Let's eat something better than toast." They didn't go anywhere expensive. He had learned something about optics and also about appetite. They went to a place Lena chose, a taco stand that served food on paper plates and gave out lime wedges like currency. He told her what had happened, about the board, about pausing the acquisition, about the plan for inventorship correction, about the investigator who had found her father. "He's alive," she said, and the sentence cracked her voice on the first syllable. "He's alive," he said, and he watched her try to breathe through relief like it was a new setting she was learning to access. "But that doesn't mean he's ready to come back." "Tell me where he is." "I will. But I want to send someone with you, not because you need a chaperone, because you'll need protection from the story that will twist around you if Aeroline decides you are a problem they can solve with a smear." She stared at him. "You think like this all the time." "I've had to," he said, "and I've learned when to choose not to." "Okay," she said, "send someone, but I'm going to my dad." The reunion wasn't a movie with music. It was a motel room with a door that stuck, and a man whose shoulders were broader than the last picture Lena had of him, and whose eyes were the same, soft, dark, startled by joy. He stood when she stepped in, and then sat because his knees made a noise and because his chest couldn't decide whether to hold air or let it go. He cried for a long time, quietly, like a man who had learned to keep his grief out of his voice, to avoid scaring the person sleeping in the next room. "Lena," he said like it was a prayer and a complication, and his favorite word. She sat beside him and put her hand on his knee. "Dad, do you know what your signature is worth?" He laughed and wiped his face. "As much as the paper it's on," he said. "I made a decision, Mika. I chose you over a fight I would have lost." "You might have lost then," she said. "You might not lose now." He looked up wary. "Who are you working for?" "No one," she said. "I'm working with someone. He wants to fix a piece of what broke." Mark, who had been Marco, studied her, and then looked up at the man standing just inside the door, the one in the good suit, with his hands polite and still. "You're the CEO," he said, not a question. "Yes," Julian said. "I'm the person in charge of the company that tried to buy the company that profited from your work. If everything goes right, that sentence will be different in a year." "What's the cost?" Mark asked. "Whatever you want it to be," Julian said. Money, yes. An apology, not the kind we print, but the kind we live. Your name where it belongs. Support when the people who were comfortable with your silence become loud. Mark's face did something complex, a set of micro-expressions that told a story of an engineer who had been told he was difficult because he wanted the science to be true and the contract to be fair. He looked at his daughter. "Do you trust him?" "I trust what he's done so far," she said, "and I trust what we can hold him accountable to." "That's enough," Mark said, a small smile touching one corner of his mouth. "For now." He agreed to let Julian's team scan all of his notebooks. He agreed to sit for a deposition. He agreed to let an old colleague, a woman named Sloan, who had seen him sketch the Yarrow battery on a pizza box in a conference room that smelled like old coffee, swear under oath that she had been there the day the idea took shape. He agreed to let himself be found. Aeroline responded the way Julian had predicted, with a statement written by a communications team that had been on retainer since the founders were still reading Medium posts about disruption. The statement called Mark's claims unfounded and an attempt to leverage publicity for personal gain. It painted Lena as a sympathetic but uninformed family member. It suggested Julian was grandstanding to cover strategic missteps. Julian read it in the back of a car and didn't feel rage so much as confirmation. "They're sloppy," he said to Priya. "They're playing the first move they ever learned and hoping we're still in the same game." "Let's force them to play in a room with windows," Priya said. They filed in federal court to correct inventorship and to enjoin Aeroline from using the disputed tech without proper attribution. They timed the filing with an op-ed published under Julian's name about the difference between wealth and ownership, about how value wasn't money stacked in a vault, but credit given to the person who deserved it. It was risky. It was also honest. The first hearing was procedural, as these things are, but it crackled with a quiet electricity that isn't often present when lawyers are debating standing and jurisdiction. Lena sat in the second row in a dress she had found at a consignment shop, Mark beside her with a tie that didn't exactly match, and hands that kept curling and uncurling in his lap. Aeroline's counsel made arguments about laches and delay that sounded smooth and hollow. Priya spoke about time and fear, and how the law makes space for people who have been pushed to the edge of their lives. The judge, a woman with steel-gray hair and a patient face, asked smart questions about lab notebooks and the date stamps on file metadata. She asked Aeroline why the notary on their key document had been disbarred. Aeroline's counsel tried to pivot to character. The judge didn't let him. After the hearing, cameras waited outside because the story had found a shape the news liked. Billionaire fights for Waitress's father's signature. Julian didn't give a speech. He said, "It's about names and the history they tell," and guided Lena and Mark into the car they were using that week, because the other one had been traced twice by a man with a camera who didn't answer questions. In the weeks that followed, the case became not just Mark's story, but the lightning rod for a conversation that had needed a spark. Engineers, some old enough to be retired, some young enough to be still scolded for writing too much in the margins, sent letters to the court asking to submit statements. Women and men whose names had been edged out of acknowledgments by a last-minute edit they were told was routine, told their stories in threads that made the internet act like a town square instead of a market. Julian watched how the culture shifted around them in small increments. He watched how his employees' shoulders loosened when they realized he wasn't going to use their work to build a ladder for himself and leave them at the bottom. He watched how the board stopped calling him impulsive and started calling him strategic in the way that meant they'd read a poll. One afternoon he found Lena in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, a stack of textbooks in front of her, and a look on her face that wasn't disbelief anymore. It was intent. "What's that?" he asked. "Intro to Materials," she said, "and this one is differential equations. I'm not sure if I'll survive, but I want to learn what my father loved. And I want to build something with my own hands, so when people say, 'That's your dad's signature,' I can say, 'This is mine.'" He smiled in a way he hadn't in a decade, without thinking about how it would be photographed. "We have a scholarship program for returning students," he said. "It isn't charity, it's an investment." She rolled her eyes with a warmth he had earned. "You'll get your return